The PC37X gaming headset from Massdrop and Sennheiser brings you into the game with an open-back design featuring angled drivers for pinpoint locational accuracy. Be heard clearly through the fold-down noise-canceling mic and enjoy the long-lasting comfort of large plush velvet ear pads. Now available in an all-matte black finish, so the headset looks as good as it sounds. For more info, click the link in the description and catch the drop before it's gone. What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Hope you're all doing well. Today we're taking a look at this brand new case from Thermaltake. This is their View 37 RGB, which actually includes 3 of their 140mm RGB ring fans. Each of these fans MSRPs for about 30 bucks. So we're talking about $90 worth of fans here included right out of the box, which probably explains partially why the MSRP on this case is $169 US. And today we'll be taking a look to see if it's worth exactly that. So right off the bat, it seems to me that Thermaltake is kind of focusing on 2 main components for this case. The first one being water cooling. There's a ton of support, which we'll talk about in just a moment. And 2, just the ability to look inside of your system and appreciate all of the innards. That's why we have this ginormous acrylic panel that sort of spans the left side and top side of the case, which we'll talk about more in a moment. But the plan for today is to briefly talk about the exterior of the case, then we'll work our way inside with the internal layout. We'll do a quick time-lapse build. I'll briefly talk about my experience with that, and then we'll finish things off with a quick thermal test with the front panel on and off to sort of gauge the delta between temperatures for primarily our CPU and GPU. So starting with the outside of the case, we have a really solid construction. It's a steel frame. It seems very well built. And we also have acrylic kind of on the front and on the side here. Starting with the front side, it's pretty much just flat acrylic and it looks really nice. It could probably pass for tempered glass if it weren't for the little micro scratches. I've been very careful with this case ever since I unboxed it a few hours ago, and still it seems there seems to be freaking scratches all over it somehow. So that's one thing that you have to bear in mind with acrylic. If you're not okay with little scratches on the outside of your case, then maybe this isn't the one for you. But apart from that, it does seem well built. There's no imperfections in the actual acrylic. It's very smooth looking. There's no weird warps or anything like that. The front panel is also, to me, it seems a little bit starved for airflow, which is another reason why I want to test thermals at the end of this video. You do get ventilation on either side here with some nice mesh, so if you want to dust that off once it gets all nasty, you can just pop the front panel off and use some compressed air or whatnot. But the ventilation here seems somewhat limited just because the fans that are pre-installed here are mounted on the outside of the steel frame, and the blades are resting up pretty close against that front acrylic panel, which makes me wonder if those fans are being starved for airflow. So we're gonna take a closer look at that later because I just don't know if this is gonna cut it. At the very front, at the top of the case, you get your front panel connectors, including a nice big power button, a small and discreet reset button, which I like, 2 USB 2.0 and 2 USB 3.0 ports, your mic and headphone jacks as well, all very accessible right there in the middle of your case. Additionally, you have this giant panel. This is sort of where it gets its View name, I would imagine, because you have this single piece of acrylic that sort of spans the entire left side and the top of your case. Kind of has this nice curve right here, giving a 90-degree bend, and it allows you to just look inside of your case from either angle, either from the side or from the top view, which is pretty cool. The downside here is, for one, that the way they have this actually installed, they have 2 thumb screws, one big one at the bottom and one big one at the top, but then there's also this plastic plate at the back that has 4 additional screws, which are just more, conventional like power supply screws with Phillips head threads on them. So you pretty much have to undo 6 screws if you want to get this side panel off, which I think is a little overkill. If you're going to be using this as a daily and you're not moving it around much, then I would probably just remove this plastic panel and just keep the 2 big thumb screws on there. That should suffice in keeping the panel in place. I mean, it's acrylic after all and not glass. It's not very heavy at all, despite the way it looks. Additionally, since this is just all acrylic at the top here, there's no place to mount any fans or radiators. So that begs the question, where's the exhaust taking place in this case, if not for just this single 140mm fan? And 2, where are you mounting additional fans and radiators for all of that water cooling support I just mentioned? For starters, you do have a couple mounting options at the front of the case. You can do up to a 360mm rad. You can also mount a couple 140s, so if you wanted to do a 280mm radiator, you could do that. There's also options for 2 200mm fans, which looks very nice. I did see a demo of that at the Thermaltake suite at CES this year. So you have plenty of mounting options at the front there, and once we take a look at the inside of the case, I'll show you the additional radiator and fan mounting areas. Taking a look at the back of the case, you kind of see what I mean here. here with the 2 large thumb screws and the 4 little screws with the plastic bracket holding that giant acrylic panel in place. Then we've also got our 140mm rear exhaust fan here on flexible mounting strips. It looks like you can also mount a 120 here and lower or raise that as you see fit. Here's a cutout for your I/O shield for the motherboard. You get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 expansion slots in the traditional horizontal setup, and you have 2 more that are vertical if you want to mount a up to a 2.5 slot card vertically. In this case, you could do that. It does come with the metal bracket, but it does not include a riser cable, so that you'll have to purchase that separately. Fortunately, this is all held in place with thumb screws. That goes for all these expansion slots as well. Something to bear in mind with most vertical GPU mounts in a case like this is that you might sacrifice some thermal performance if your cooler, especially if it's just a simple air cooler, is brushing up against this side panel here. Then it probably will be a little bit starved for airflow. You've also got a power supply cutout here. No removable bracket, just a simple cutout. So you can feel some rubber pads in here for reduced noise and vibration. There is a dust filter for your power supply. It is removable from the rear of your case. Pulls out just like that. It's fairly long, which indicates that we might have a fan mounting point at the bottom of our case, which we'll take a closer look at in just a moment. But very easy to remove and replace, just to give it a quick dusting to make sure that everything is properly ventilated. And I'm at a funny angle right now, so just give me a moment. There we go. And then lastly, at the back here, we have 2 captive thumb screws for our right side panel. I should mention that the other thumb screws for the large acrylic panel are not captive. That would have been nice to see. All right, so let's pop off this acrylic panel here and take a closer look inside the case. So once you have all the screws and the plastic bracket removed, popping it off is pretty simple. Kind of just push it back, and then you lift like so. See? Single giant piece of acrylic that will surely get scratched under any conditions, so be very careful. So here we are inside the case. Couple things to note right off the bat. We can support up to EATX boards in here, plenty of space for that, and all the way down to mini ITX if that's something you want to do. The first thing I noticed is that there's plenty of cutouts for cables. You get 2 at the top here, 6 on the right, which, mind you, these 3 right here on the inside are probably going to be covered up with a traditional ATX motherboard. You've also got 2 more cutouts down here for your front panel connectors and things like that. Only the grommets, or only the cutouts on the right of the motherboard are grommeted, however. I would have liked to see these 2 at least be grommeted, especially with the acrylic top panel that you can see through from that angle. I mean, there's no radiator or fans to cover up these 2 holes, so I felt at the very least, given the design of the case, that Thermaltake would have provided some grommets at the top here just for an overall cleaner look. So that was a bit of a bummer, but what can you do? Also, there's looks like there's about 6 pre-installed standoffs, which is kind of weird. If you wanted to install an ATX board, you'd still have to install 3 standoffs right here. So they kind of did half the job for you. Interesting. And then here's your vertical bracket for a GPU. Easily removable with a couple screws here. We also have a look at our bottom area where we can see now very much more clearly without any reflection that this does not have a power supply basement, which is going to be an issue for some people because that's such a common thing to see in lots of cases these days. But at the same time, it might just work out well with the design language of this case. The whole idea here is that you want to be able to see every component in your rig, and you want to show it off in its entirety, especially, you know, if you're going to go with a Thermaltake power supply with like an RGB fan on it and stuff. You're not going to want to hide that out, but again, it's going to be a deal breaker for some people or not very desirable for others, so something to bear in mind. Oh, I almost forgot to come back to this. It does look like we have a couple mounting areas for either a pair of 120s or 140s. From the looks of it, at the bottom of our case here, you can even slide one of those fans underneath the drive cage, or your graphics card, of course. That also explains why our power supply dust filter is so long. We have a hard drive cage that can support 3 2.5-inch or 3.5-inch drives. They are toolless and removable, so you kind of just pinch the sides here to pull it out. I shouldn't say completely toolless because you do still have to screw the drive in with physical screws and whatnot. But they're made of plastic. They're not the most durable looking. They look kind of cheap, but they actually feel a bit sturdier than they look. So I guess that's not an issue. I wouldn't imagine that these are gonna break on you anytime soon or anything like that. So there's 3 of those. There's more drive mounting options at the back of the case behind the motherboard tray, which we'll take a look at later. It also looks like this cage is removable. In fact, it would have to be if you wanted to mount any fans or radiators to the other radiator mounting spot that I was alluding to earlier, which is to the right of the motherboard right here. You can do up to a 360 millimeter radiator or triple 120 fans. Now, as you might have guessed, since we do have a radiator mounting position right here, there is ample ventilation on the back side panel, which I didn't show you guys earlier. Ton of ventilation slots with a magnetic dust filter that's easily removable. You do have to take the side panel off in order to remove it, but it seems to be a proper way to exhaust any hot air coming out of that radiator, or fans, whichever you choose to put there. So from what I can tell so far, and judging from the showpieces that Thermaltake had of this case at their CES suite this year, is that this is gonna be a really popular spot for a radiator. Most people are probably gonna wanna show off their rad fans if they're RGB and stuff and looks all nice and pretty through the acrylic. They're gonna wanna mount a radiator right here, which means they're gonna be relying on these front intake fans to sort of deliver healthy airflow to their radiator. Otherwise, their CPU temperatures could likely suffer. The question that we'll answer later today is, are these front intake fans being choked too hard in order to provide that airflow efficiently? So we'll take a look at that later on and how that affects GPU temperatures as well and that sort of thing. But for now, let's pop off the right side panel here and take a look behind the motherboard tray. So taking a look at the back of the case here, we have plenty of room for cable management, it seems like. We actually have about an inch, maybe an inch and a quarter of room between the motherboard tray itself and the side panel. So lots of room for wiring. You'll also notice that we have 4 removable trays that are held in place by a single thumb screw. Each of these trays can house either a single 3.5-inch mechanical hard drive or 2 2.5-inch drives. So you can do 8 SSDs back here or 4 mechanical drives, which is pretty sweet. However, bear in mind that if you're mounting a radiator or a fan in this area right here against the motherboard tray, then populating these trays with drives might not be the best idea because that'll probably block a lot of the exhaust coming off of that cooling solution. So bear that in mind. And even if you do populate the rest of the trays, there's still plenty of cable routing area right here in the middle of the case. Lots of tie down points. Again, just a lot of clearance between the tray and the side panel. So cable management looks pretty good. It looks pretty promising in a case that doesn't even have a power supply basement where you can just kind of shove all that stuff down there. But of course, we'll verify all that once we do the build momentarily. Now, before we dive into the build, I wanted to quickly talk about the lighting accessories that come included with this case. For starters, we have 2 lighting controllers. This one right here is SATA powered. Thank God it's not Molex. You've got a couple connectors, actually 3 connectors for your RGB ring fans and some LED ins and outs. You've got connecting points if you wanted to wire this up to your motherboard. It does support ASUS MSI and Gigabyte so that you can interface with their RGB software, so you can have the lighting on your fans match the lighting on your motherboard, on your GPU, and so forth. Or you can just simply leave it hooked up to the controller and you've got different adjustments for fan speed, lighting mode, color mode, and light speed. This does not make your computer run at light speed. Rather, it controls the speed of various lighting effects. And then you've also got another controller here in the form of a PCI expansion bracket, which is actually pretty cool. Has all the same buttons that this one does, except you can access it from the outside of your case. You don't have to store it inside. You do have to fish around back there if you want to reach the buttons, but it's kind of nice that Thermaltake's given you several options for connecting and controlling your lighting. So on that note, folks, let's go ahead and dive into a quick little time lapse, and then we'll circle back, talk about how it all went before doing some thermal testing. Alrighty, the build is done, and it is lit. Literally lit. Okay, I'll just stop trying. But it looks good. It looks really good. It looks a lot nicer than I thought it would, to be honest. You know what works here is that since the top panel is acrylic, it allows just the lighting in your environment to shine through the top of your build and sort of just kind of create a nice natural lighting environment for your components. Whereas, you know, traditionally you only have a side panel and you're getting sort of light at a weird angle. You know, if you've got like lights in the ceiling and stuff like that, there's a lot of shadows and doesn't look as properly lit as it does in this case. So that's really nice. But this is also not very good for being on camera because of reflections and stuff. So I'm actually gonna remove the panel before I continue on with how the build went for me. So give me a sec. I guess I'll just start in sort of the order that I installed things with the motherboard. Very straightforward, pretty simple process. I did have to install those 3 thumb screws that Thermaltake gypped me on. They also didn't, or maybe I just didn't see it, but I did not find a Phillips head to hex adapter to install the 3 standoffs, which was kind of frustrating. So I just ended up tightening them with a little wrench that I had. I have the adapter as well, but I just used the wrench because it was nearby. But that's weird. I think that should be included if you're not going to pre-install all of the standoffs. The drive cage obviously had to get removed. There were a couple thumb screws, as I thought, that were located behind the motherboard tray. Very easy to remove. Just standard Phillips head screws. Pop the drive cage out, as well as the platform. There were 2 screws at the bottom of the case, so I had to lay it on its side to get that platform out, and that was no problem. The mounting situation for a radiator, if you're gonna mount one right here, there's like flexible mounting strips, but they're very short strips, so there's not a lot of play where you can put the radiator. You can either put it like smack dab in the middle, at least for a 240 rad like you see here, smack dab in the middle or way up top, but then you're kind of blocking this cutout, at least with the fractal cooler that I have here, the Celsius S24, since it's got, you know, your tubing here, mounting it at the very top wasn't ideal because I was then covering this cutout and it was like interfering with the cables, or you can put it way down at the bottom, but then, you know, the tubing kind of goes over the GPU and it doesn't look all that graceful. So middle mount seemed to be the best option for me, especially since it's pretty close to these front intake fans here, which you can't really get a good look at here. Maybe I'll throw some B-roll in for you. The other thing is that the motherboard tray is actually covering up a lot of the radiator grill behind it. So it doesn't look like a whole lot of air is being exhausted. I mean, granted, some certainly is, but I feel like it could just be a little bit more open. The other thing that I'll mention is that our graphics card here is a GTX 1080 Ti from EVGA. This is the For the Win 3, I believe, and it's a pretty lengthy card. I think it's like around 11 inches maybe. I'll put it somewhere in the video, but that's about as long as I would go if you're planning to install a radiator where I have, because otherwise you run into clearance issues. So you want to bear that in mind. Rounding out with cable management, it was actually a pretty awesome experience in this case. Surprisingly, I'm so spoiled, I feel, with power supply basements now, of just shoving everything in there, that I was like, oh, I wonder how this is gonna go. This is more of a, you know, an old school way to route cables just behind your motherboard tray. There was actually plenty of room back there, like I mentioned, over an inch between the motherboard tray and that right side panel. So the tie down points were all very smartly placed. So I used 3 or 4 of those. And just so much room to spare. Granted, I didn't mount any drives back here. The only drive I installed, maybe you saw it in the time lapse, was an M.2 SSD straight onto the motherboard. So I didn't have to fiddle with that, but I figure a drive installation in this case is gonna be pretty straightforward. Nothing really new or uncharted there. So altogether, I mean, the cabling looks great, the case looks great, everything put together. I did install the LED controller, obviously, to hook up our 3 ring fans. And there are a couple different lighting modes and other cool things that it can do. So let me show you that really quick. Okay, so we're running the system full throttle at the moment. It's under a stress test combination of Unigine Heaven 4.0 and Ada 64, so that way we're taxing the CPU and the GPU simultaneously. It's been running for about 20 minutes on this stress test without the front panel, so just bare front fans. These fans are at a fixed RPM, so they won't be fluctuating RPM based on, you know, the temperature changes and things like that, so there's no variation from test to test. And our temperatures on both processors have pretty much maxed out at this point. It's been about 10 minutes or so since I've seen them get increasingly hot. So right now, our package is at a maximum of 78 degrees Celsius, is the hottest it got on our 7900X. And it's actually, right now, it's hovering around the 70 degree mark, you know, give or take a few degrees. So it's actually not too bad at all. And then on our GPU, we're maxing out at 63 degrees Celsius, with, you know, it's sort of fluctuating based on the scenes that are in Unigine Heaven 4.0. What is happening right now? But it's mainly, I don't know what this is. I honestly don't know what's happening right now. Ignoring this, we're getting 78C max on the package for the CPU and 63 degrees Celsius on our GPU. This must be a Windows update troll. Sabotaged. Stupid Windows 10 update assistant. So what we're going to do now is pop on the front panel and wait another 10 to 20 minutes before rechecking the temps and seeing how much hotter it gets. All right, so we're about 20 minutes later into our stress test here, now with the front panel fastened and secured. And you know what? We're actually in pretty good shape. We only went up 3 degrees on our CPU, going from 78 to 81 degrees C, which is a lot better than I expected, to be honest. It looks so closed off on the front here, but the numbers are proving otherwise. And maybe that's just how I've configured the radiator and fans to be right next to the intake fans, so whatever fresh air is being pulled in is going straight through the radiator fins, and it's doing a great job. And that goes double for the GPU. We've only went up 1 degree Celsius, going from 63 to 64, so altogether, guys, it's looking like thermals in this case aren't really an issue. At the front end, good stuff all around. Good job, Thermaltake, and we can close out this video. Hey, I'm just gonna end it right here, guys. I'm not gonna go back to the A cam where the set looks all nice and stuff because it's late and wifey sauce is waiting on me. But I just wanted to say that 2 thumbs up for this case. The price is a little steep, granted, but if you're gonna want some blingy fans that perform well and are very quiet, mind you, anyway, then I mean it's 90 bucks worth of fans here. So I guess you just gotta decide for yourself if it's worth it in that sense. Water cooling support's great. I would've liked to see Type-C on the front panel for a $170 case, but what can you do? And the thermals seem to be just fine. So yeah, and it's quiet. It's really quiet, especially because, you know, the ventilation is on the right side of the case. So especially if you're gonna be putting this to the right side of your desk, then you'll probably hear it a lot less than a traditional chassis that has its exhaust on the top. You know what I mean? Because it'll literally be further away from you, and there will be a whole computer tower in between you and the exhaust noise, if that makes sense. So I don't know, guys. Let me know what you think. I'm pretty impressed with it, to be honest, and I'd love to hear what you have to say down in the comments below. Let me know if you like this video in general. Toss a like on it if you did. Helps a lot. And subscribe to the channel for more tech stuff coming at you really soon. You can also check me out on FLOATPLANE if you want to watch all my content a week early without ads. I'll put a link for that down in the description. Guys, have a good one, and I will see you all in the next video.